Hey, when you're done with my laundry, I need you to go get a microphone rig that's more obnoxious looking. I feel like I'm a mid-period Oliver Stone movie. All right. Yep. Hot, hit, hot. Tuesday something and Tuesday 2. Thursday, I don't care about you. It's Wednesday. I'm in love with Wednesday. It's my favorite day for Pixar. Boy, let me tell you, commuting in Los Angeles on the bus, it ain't for sissies. It ain't for, no offense to any sissies. I'll tell you who it's for. It's for punchy old men riding around the goddamn bus all day and going to the comic book store adds. Let's see. I got off work at 1 p.m. It is now 5:20 p.m. So it adds a whole another detour to my commute. I would commute another 9 hours if it meant getting comics. In fact, I was hoping to get all my funny books today because I got a paycheck on its way and there was another stimulus. Thank you, Uncle Sam, but somebody hasn't paid all of his rent. It's not me. So, still haven't got my deposit back from the last place either. But let's hear about your problem. So I was able to at least go and get I made a sacrifice to not buy drugs this week, and I bought comic books instead. The original drug that I've been addicted to. For, boy, what are we looking at? 1988, so this is the 33rd anniversary? Gosh. Frankly, and I don't want to get off on a tangent here. Yes, I do. People who were born in the year of 1991 are, if they haven't already, turning 30 this year. And I'm sure they're upset about it. Nobody enjoys the 30th birthday for some reason. I didn't enjoy the run-up. I didn't enjoy 29. 30 was fun, though, to be honest with you. And so, yes, I'm sure that all you new 30-year-olds, it's got to be rough. You know what? Go fuck yourselves. Because you were born the year I graduated from the fucking 8th grade. I'm sorry for swearing. Speaking of the 8th grade, I got some comic books. Sorry, I'm very giggly. Which is honestly, walking in here, in my head, I was like, alright, I'm either going to be giggly or I'm going to be all meh. So, I'm glad we didn't land on meh for a change. Also, I hope this is recording, because this promises to be a long one. And if it's just me mouthing words for half an hour, I mean, it couldn't be less interesting. All right. So, what I got today is I bought a lot I bought all the X books that I hadn't bought the last week or this week, and same with the Star Wars books, which were only 2. Because those are the storylines that I'm very invested in. And so I want to keep up on those. But then I've also been buying, kind of starting from the, June, which I think I'm going back to. I think I've cleared out June. I think I'm into, no, it's only the first. It's only the second. Oh, I got to change my Fantastic Four calendar. It is only the first week of July here, or the first Wednesday of July anyways. So I can see right above the Fantastic Four number 236. So, anyways, I've also been trying to buy some of the stragglers, or some of the books that I've been wanting to read, but just haven't yet. So, I have no idea where any of these books have left off. Starting with this one, actually, I wanted to come to Shang Chi last because I wanted to talk about Lionel Yu. But okay, this came out, I believe, this week. This is That Texas Blood number 7. This is a new story arc, so if you want to jump on, this wouldn't be the worst place to do it. You definitely want to get the first trade, not just so you can follow the story, but because it's very good. It's written by Chris Condon, whose name I can now look up. I've been watching some of the old ones, and I was like, I can. I used to bring the laptop in, and I had all this pre-research done, and I was like, this is taking too much time. But him or him. But now that I can do this on my laptop, because it's the future. All right. I'm not finding a lot of. I think this might be Chris Condon is more of a movie guy. Like he's got more IMDb credits than he has comic book database credits, which, pans out. Looks like a lot of littler stuff, shorts, etc. But this comic is drawn by Jacob Phillips, who is the son of Sean Phillips, who is I have one of his art books up there. The main collaborator of the last 20 years with Ed Brubaker, and they've put out just rafters of brilliant comics, mostly crime, all noir and pulp, mostly crime, some supernatural stuff. Even in the supernatural stories, they're all crime stories, basically. And this is a very good, from what I could tell from Chris Condon, he's probably a Texan himself, which resonates. But, I mean, you don't have to be Texan to recognize the proud noir history of that Lone Star state. The Coen brothers have set at least 2 films and very crime noir films in the state of Texas. And they're a couple of Jews from Minnesota. But, I think Jim Thompson was from Oklahoma originally, but he wrote a lot of stuff that took place in Texas. Texas, for whatever reason, has always been just very fertile for crime. And it makes sense if you ever spent time in Texas. And I don't mean that as a criticism whatsoever. I love Texas. The Southwest in general, I enjoy, largely because I've always, I grew up in Southern California, which is not the Southwest, like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. But I've long had friends and family in all those places. And so I've spent a lot of time. And plus also being in a band and being in comedy, it's easier for me to travel to those parts of the country. So read this book. I don't know. I don't honestly. This was our main character, our main cop anyway, in the previous arc, who was kind of our guide as things went to pieces for this one family, and it was really good. I don't know what else. And I mean the other. So when I do these, I choose 3 for the week. Those are the ones I read first. So in this week, it's really just, I want to read these first. I haven't read that Texas Blood in a while. I also have not read Usagi Yojimbo in a while. This is number 20 from the the IDW publisher, San Diego's own. This is a new arc, also a 2-part arc, which I believe, and it's called Yukichi, which I think is this character's name, and I'm not 100% if she's been introduced before. She might have shown up in the last issue. I don't remember. The great thing, and I've said this before about Usagi Yojimbo and Stan Sakai's work, is that you can jump in pretty much anywhere. You don't need to wait. It's anything you need to know about Usagi Yojimbo, you'll be filled in on. And it won't be, it's not like a big crawl at the beginning. He just writes very short stories. He's written longer form stories for sure, but his arcs tend to be no longer than 6, and to have a 2-part story, not unusual at all. Excuse me. So I feel like if you are anywhere, and especially if you see the collected editions, which are slightly smaller in size than a comic book, but don't usually that's a bad thing. Usually when they have to shrink a comic book page, it doesn't reproduce well. But in Stan Sakai's case, the way he draws, he doesn't draw very busy. And it's better bigger, but that's what she's on. But yeah, you get what I'm saying. And then finally Shang Chi number 2. Shang Chi versus Captain America in this one. So I went and saw the film Zola last week. Highly recommended. And I hope my high school girlfriend is doing okay. And they showed a trailer for the trailer for the Shang Chi movie that's coming. I've made it a point over the last year or two, especially, to only watch trailers in the theater, especially because I went and got the AMC A list, so I can go see 3 movies a week for. I pay $25 a month. I can go see 3 movies a week for nothing. I just walk in, like I own the place. It's ridiculous. So I go to the movies a lot, which is nothing new. But this is definitely a high point of movie attendance for me. So it's like, why would I watch it on my crappy laptop here in this glorious studio when I could watch it on the big screen? And I'll probably see it 9 more times. So I was super, I was like, oh, I got to get that Shang-Chi that's sitting in my bag. And one thing, and this is a sidebar again, but one thing that I really like about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is, especially because it's so huge now. I mean, it's over a decade old. They got all these TV shows, which I haven't watched even the tip of the iceberg yet. But I always feel like, oh, they're never going to do this character or that. And then they'll be like, well, aren't we? And one of Shang-Chi's first villains is one of the stupidest villains of all time. One of the most laudable and ridiculous villains. So naturally, he's one of my favorites. And he's a guy who, in lieu of hands, I can't even, he has swords. And his name is obviously Razor Fist. And he was introduced early in Master of Kung Fu. And was, badass. But just the logistics of having swords for hands. And not swords necessarily, just blades. There's not like a hilt. He can't just take them off. What's he going to take them off with? The other sword? So he's very angry because he cannot wipe his own bottom. You would be too. I'd be livid. So he was very grim and dark in Master of Kung Fu. I don't think he even spoke. He's one of those. And then he became kind of a joke in the 80s. And then largely forgotten. Whenever he shows up, it's usually so somebody can make that same bathroom joke. So to have him in the movie and it looks like it's not being played for laughs, I am 1,000,000% on board. I also didn't realize that cover here is by Lionel Francis Yu, who is one of my favorite comic book artists and a lot of people's favorite. He's very popular. 1 day older than me, exactly. So you think you're better than me? Yes, you are. So I looked him up, and I had forgotten all the stuff he had done. He has drawn so many books that I was going to buy anyway, that he just kind of de facto became one of my favorites. The first thing I really remember was he did an Ultimate Wolverine versus Hulk series that was written by a TV writer, Damon Lindelof, who at the time I didn't care about, and as time went by, I still didn't really care about. I think I never watched Lost. And I think I watched the first season of whatever that stupid show was on HBO, where half the population of Earth went missing or something like that. It wasn't terrible, but it was a lot of. By the end of the first season, I was like, honey, you're never going to pay off all this stuff to justify me watching the rest of it. But he wrote this Ultimate Hulk versus Wolverine book, and it wasn't bad. But there was like 2 years in between issues at one point, which was even more. But the art was so good, and the story was good. I will give him that. And then, yeah, that was the first thing I remembered noticing him. But he drew he drew a bunch of stuff in Civil War. He drew Captain America for a minute. Oh, that was with Nahisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates, sorry. That was really good. That was just recently. Indestructible Hulk, I think that might have been the Jason Aaron run. New Avengers, I knew, yeah. So, I mean, he's just in a bunch of stuff with Mark Millar, who is not anybody's favorite. But, yeah. And, he drew a bunch of issues of this current run of the X-Men. So he's been around a while. But I've always been a big admirer of his art. And I also, the fact that he's Filipino, I find interesting. Is that what I... The Philippines have been largely unsung, I feel, in the comic book industry. But that just because I only hang out with white people for the most part, not on purpose, certainly. But I think I've mentioned this sort of thing before. In the 70s, Marvel and DC both started hiring a lot of Filipino artists because they worked cheaper, which is a really shitty reason. But I mean, and honestly, it wasn't as though it's not as though American comic book artists are making money hand over fist, but they were cheap and they were great. I mean, so many Filipino comic book artists who stop. I know you don't like Asian people for some. Why did I hire an intern who hates Asian people? Why am I clearly talking? Oh, you can't see. Sorry, I goofed it, and I'll have to. We'll fix it. Fix it in post. Anyway, as I was saying, the Philippines have a long and proud history um, in superhero comics and in American superhero comics, and have done since the 70s. Tony DeZuniga, who I met once in 2008, lovely man, him and his wife both. Well, his wife was not a lovely man, but you get it. I think I even saw him win an Inkpot Award at San Diego Comic Con a couple years previous. It was at a panel, and at that year, I remember at Comic Con I went to a few panels that year. Was that 2011? It was around that late aughts, early teens, and I remember going to a few panels that year that were spotlights on artists, just one, instead of like sometimes they'll do like, well, they still will often do panels where there's a bunch of artists, but I went to a bunch that year that were for different individual artists, and it was either Tony DeZuniga or I think it was Tony DeZuniga because most of those other '70s guys had unfortunately passed away. But you had guys like Tony Velasquez, Alfredo Wakala, yeah, and just brilliant Bronze Age artists. So good that they were the kinds of artists that a lot of those reprints of that, like that Jonah Hex stuff that I have, were all showcases. So they were black and white. But if anything, I think the black and white worked better for a lot of their styles. Those guys were ink maniacs. I don't know. Maniacs? Oh, you're fired for that joke, if nothing else. Also, the Asian hate thing. Read the room, man. Sorry, I'll have a new fake intern next week. Wash my car before you leave. So Lionel Francis Yu is part of that very proud tradition, and that's all I really wanted to say. And now I'm all thrown off on the time, and then the whole thing. And you know what? I really have got to give it to myself for not losing my mind over everything crappy that happens to me. Because you know what, kids? Once enough crap happens to you, I don't have it in me anymore. I spent 43 years just punching things, and now it's a quieter rage that is sublimated by comics mostly. So, all right. So last week I read some funny books. This is the first one I read, Compass #1. I have to already correct myself, and I had a feeling. So last week I said that David Walker co-wrote this book, and I was right about that. But the thing of it is that it was David Walker and not David F. Walker. So I was talking last week as though David F. Walker was a writer on this book. He is not. The David Walker here in question, who co-wrote this book with Robert McKenzie, they're both Australian fellows. And this is the first thing that they've ever done. What I hadn't noticed last week either when I bought this is that it doesn't say it on the cover, but on the inside cover it says, Greg Rucka presents Compass. Greg Rucka is a tremendous comic book writer. A guy, what I've come to think of as my generation. He's about my age, maybe a few years older, and came to prominence in the early 2000s, I would say. Maybe in the 90s. But he cut his teeth over at... He was also... I can't remember which came first, but he's also a crime novelist. But he wrote GCPD for DC. We'll get some more letters in there. And he wrote what remains one of my absolute favorite runs on Wolverine, beginning in the year 2002, because it was immediately after X2 came out. I remember that very clearly. And I think, no, you did not draw any of those. I didn't, you didn't, and Lionel Francis, you did not. Anyway, so he tells the story in the back of this that he knows Mackenzie and Walker. He knew them just as they were fans, I think. And they had become friends of his, online correspondence and stuff. And then they finally met. He did a convention in Australia, and they bonded further. But he said these guys are just like idea machines. So they just have all these pitches for him all the time. And they pitched him this one, and he went, yeah, well, let's get that done. So I feel like this is another one of those things in comics, which is not uncommon, certainly not uncommon these days, where you get a veteran to vouch for you, especially at a place like Image, and they'll be like, okay, yeah, if Greg Rucka says you guys are good, that's good enough for us. So the book itself was really fun, although I am kind of struggling to remember how it goes. It's oh right, okay, so it's kind of it takes place in the 11th century, and or no, yeah, the 11th century, and it's historically accurate. There is magic and stuff, but they were treating it where it's like Genghis Khan versus the or Genghis Khan's scholars versus the Muslim scholars of the time. And this is something that I had read before, but I'm largely ignorant of still. But most of mathematics as we know them now comes from Islam. And all the, algebra was created by an Arabic guy. Obviously, we use Arabic numerals instead of Roman numerals. So that's the sort of the setting of the story, and then the tension comes from, we have our main character here whose name eludes me, and she is like a scholar, but also sort of an adventurer, almost like an Indiana Jones type. And so she's going out trying to collect. They might be looking for the Holy Grail, even. No, I don't think something quite that Judeo-Christian. But yeah, it's really fun, and it's an era of history that you don't see in comics a ton. Not that I can recall off the top of my head. So yeah, I'll be picking the rest of this up. Thanks, Greg Rucka. Also, oh boy, finally, Black Hammer Reborn. Super good stuff. I think I might have said that with any of the Black Hammer stuff, you can pretty much jump in, and you don't need to know all the stuff going on. They are just fun superhero comics. And I still stand by that statement, but you're going to want to read. This is the core Black Hammer title now. That Jeff Lemire's writing it, because he didn't write all of the... There's a lot of miniseries, spin-offs from Black Hammer, where you still don't really need to have read Black Hammer to get the Barbalian one that was just recently, the Black Hammer Visions, although that would make more sense, probably. Skull Kicker and Dr. Tomorrow and Professor Sherlock, or is it Sherlock Frankenstein? All of those, I think Dr. Tomorrow was right. All of those spin-offs you can read and just enjoy as superhero comics. You don't really need to have read all of it. But I would suggest reading the original Black Hammer series before reading this one. And now we have the current Black Hammer, the daughter of the original Black Hammer, who, when we last saw her, was a much younger woman. Her father had gone missing when she was 10. By the time she was in her 20s, she was an investigative reporter, and then she solved the mystery. Now she's married and in her 30s and retired from superheroing. But as always happens, some other stuff comes up and she has to dust the old hammer off again. It's really, really good stuff. It's really fun stuff. He throws a few curveballs at you that I didn't see coming, so I enjoyed that. And speaking of enjoying things, oh boy, I am sad to see this series go. This was, and it also occurred to me today that while they've been doing the Heroes Reborn series, they've not been doing any other Avengers books, which adds up. I kind of like that they do that. And I mean, in the old days, it would have just been a storyline in the Avengers. But I've got no problem slapping a Heroes Reborn on it. Not really. Now that I'm thinking about it, I might have a little. I might have preferred it just because they did a similar thing a couple of years back with No Way Home. So there was an Avengers, the big crossover of that year or whatever, I want to say, ends dramatically as they are wont to do. And then at that point, the Avengers are kind of out of their own time. So they did a similar thing where it was like a separate book. They stopped doing the Avengers. They did No Way Home. Right? I think I might be remembering this wrong. But they have it like, it's again that thing, and this is where it does kind of bother me. It's that thing where they're trying to get people to buy comic books because very few people beyond me want to do that. And so they go, hey, it's #1. And so more people are going to be like, oh, I can just jump in here then. And no, you can't jump in here. This is the first issue, but it's the last issue. And it just, honestly, and I'm being 100% serious, the main reason it bothers me is that it makes my comic book list look all goofy. Like, I just want to have Avengers from the earliest issue I own to the latest issue I own in numerical order in my boxes, and I got to put it all. Not that big a deal. So this ends as we would have guessed, where the Avengers finally, whatever happened to the Avengers, they were like, well, here we are. So, yeah, they show up and they beat the crap out of the Squadron Supreme. I think we can go ahead and call them Squadron Sinister again, frankly. Everybody, they win. I don't want to spoil it. It's a resounding victory. Hyperion and Nighthawk are left unaccounted for, which I am fully, if they're going to do another Heroes Reborn, yeah. You will get zero arguments. The third one, fine. It was so much fun. And it's Aaron and McGinnis. So this whole series, Jason Aaron has written, but there's been different artists. And then McGinnis will do a backup story with him. And then there'll be different writers for some of the spinoffs too. But now we're back to the form with McGinnis, Aaron and McGinnis, who are a great team. They've been doing the Avengers for a couple of years now. And it's just beating the hell out of each other, which is all I want from my superheroes. Not all I want, but it's definitely, when I get it, I'm on board. So, and also speaking of Squadron Supreme, this week I read What If #2. This is from Volume 1, 1977. What If I haven't mentioned, I'm sure I have, was a series that began in the 70s. And the title is self-explanatory. Each issue is, well, what if this thing didn't happen or if this thing did? So in this one, it's what if the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner? And wouldn't you know, things work out pretty okay for Bruce. He's able to be like, guys, I'm not here to break your tanks. General Ross, I'm not here to break your daughter in half. I would like to marry her and then emotionally break her in half. And so things work out. There is a twist ending that I did not see coming and I thought was great. And then there's other things, and this was very early on in the series, obviously, but other things where, since the Hulk didn't become the Hulk as we know him, the big brute, the mindless lout, the Avengers never formed. And then, since Bruce Banner was like a superhero, in this body, and he changed, that was the other thing that was fun, is that the first 6 issues, I want to say, of The Incredible Hulk, he doesn't turn into the Hulk when he's angry. He turns into the Hulk at night, and that's something that they would every now and again they'll do that again. I think in Immortal Hulk, they make reference to that a lot. When Peter David was writing the Hulk in the early '90s, late '80s, early '90s, when I was reading it a lot, he was back to that. Hulk. It's more like a werewolf thing. But yeah, since he doesn't lose control of his temper, there's no need for that particular storyline to come up. He ends up moving to New York and working with the Fantastic Four, and they eventually cure the Thing of being the Thing. So he just becomes Ben Grimm again, and it's fun. The reason, aside from the fact that it's fun, you can read this on the Marvel app, is that I think I read this on the Marvel app a few years ago, in fact. But the thing about the Marvel app is, for one thing, you don't get all the house ads, and I like to read, I like to look at it. The comic shop I used to work at in the 2000s used to have run ads in Marvel Comics in the 70s, so I always find that fun. You know, it's a little personal connection. And you get your Stan soapbox, you get Stan Lee. In this one, in particular, Stan Lee is touting the original graphic novel of the Silver Surfer that he and Jack Kirby are going to do in 1977, which was a big deal and which I don't think ever happened. I think him and Jack might have done a monthly book or something, but it wasn't an original. I could be completely wrong. And I've just been reading so much about those guys that you think I would know. Here's what, and then the letters page, which they don't usually include on the app. So in this issue 2, so the first issue was what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four, and I think it was quarterly back then, so people were able to write in, and an enterprising young man wrote in with a bunch of ideas. What if Rick Jones, not Bruce Banner, had become the Hulk? What if Bucky wasn't killed and Cap hadn't been frozen? What if Spider-Man had stopped the thief who killed Uncle Ben? And so on and so on. And these were all ideas that I think they eventually did use. And the writer of that letter is none other than Mark Gruenwald, who would go on to write what most people, aside from me, consider to be the ultimate Squadron Supreme story in the 80s. So that's one of the fun things about reading old books is the letters page. And like I've mentioned this before too, I think it was like Kurt Busiek would often get letters printed, and so but I thought it was at least somewhat ironic, or at least a coincidence, that I've been reading all the Squadron Supreme stuff, and Mark Gruenwald's name pops up. He might have even written some of those stories that he had come up with the ideas for. Not that they were, I will say, and nothing again against Mark Gruenwald, but those were not ideas that only he could have thought of. But I mean, it was a very new thing. Also this week, which was not as much fun, I read Dead Man Volume, 4? Book 4 of Dead Man. These are also from the Bronze Age. These are 70s stories, largely from Adventure Comics, which was an anthology series that DC did in the 70s that starred a bunch of different superheroes in their own stories. So you had like Green Lantern and Flash and Wonder Woman, and then Dead Man was in a lot of those too. So they'd only be like 8 to 10 page stories in those. And I love Dead Man. Dead Man has always been one of my favorite characters. Always. Dead Man has long been one of my favorite characters. DC in general, as I may have mentioned, is not my favorite publisher. That would be Marvel Comics. But what I do like about DC is their D-list, or they're not there. I'm not interested in, I'm not as interested anyway, in Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman as I am in the Demon and Dead Man and Jonah Hex. Characters that are not necessarily their biggest and brightest, but I find more interesting for that. So Dead Man is a character who was originally introduced, I want to say 1971, somewhere in the early to mid 70s, and he was an acrobat named Boston Brand, obviously, and his persona was Dead Man. He was an acrobat, but he would have such death-defying acrobatic stunts that it was as though he was a dead man. He was only a dead man could live through that. And there was something very much in the water in the 70s, and I think we have Evel Knievel to blame for most of it, where stuntmen and daredevils were a big deal. Mr. Miracle was also on DC by the great Jack Kirby, and Ghost Rider started out as a stunt rider and stuff like that. So there was always that. In the Bronze Age was a lot of that. So Dead Man, Boston Brand, is assassinated while on the trapeze, and Ramavishnu, I think it's a Hindu god, and I'm pretty sure it's a real one, not one that they just made up, gives Boston Brand the ability to essentially be a ghost to solve his own murder. So he can't touch or talk to anybody, but he can possess people, like, so one person at a time, and make them do stuff. And he obviously, being a ghost, he's able to listen in on things and snoop around. So and he's also kind of a wise guy, and he's pissed off about it. I think that was the thing that always appealed to me too. It's a very existential book where now he's dead, and now he's got to figure out who killed him. On top of that, he doesn't even get to rest, so he's kind of pissed off about it. And then once he solves his own murder, he still has to be a superhero. He's still there balancing good and evil. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, obviously, the premise as I describe it doesn't sound as much. No, it is a lot of fun. But they started reprinting these. I want to say in the early teens, and I started buying them right away. But I have this one, and I have Volume 5 still to read, and then there was another series in the '90s, like a 9-issue series that I haven't read yet. But the thing about these is like they're good, but I also can only they're really stupid at the same time. And so it takes a while. Gosh, this is really going to go on long. I blame you. This is going to be like an hour. And finally, I can't believe I forgot that I own this, and then I think I remembered why. But last night I read Strange Tales number 169. This is the first appearance of none other than Jericho Drum, Brother Voodoo, who would go on to eventually become Dr. Voodoo, Sorcerer Supreme, but that didn't last too long. I think he's currently still... Brother Voodoo was, again, this is another thing from the Bronze Age, is the occult and stuff like that was very big. So you had, again, Ghost Rider. They got to mash them up in that one. DC had a bunch of books like Witchcraft and House of Secrets and the House of Mystery. And Marvel had Ghost Rider and the Son of Satan and Brother Voodoo. And yeah, it's not what I would necessarily call the Haitian accents they give some of the characters are a little cringy. So what I think happened was I bought this. There was a time in, I want to say 2019. Yeah, early 2019, where I was not doing great. And so I went heavily into debt by buying probably like $1,000 worth of comic books inside of 2 months. I'm doing better. And so I bought this from a dealer out in Diamond Bar, who I bought a bunch of books from. And I think this was in the dollar bin, and I was like, oh my God, and I couldn't believe it, and I grabbed it. And then I read it, and uh-oh. Somebody really wanted to be a park ranger, so they cut the coupon out of this ad. I mean, it's technically incomplete. Other than that, the book is in very good shape. I'm not a condition queen, so it's not a huge deal. Like, the pages are yellow, and there's a little bit, and the staples are getting a little loose here. I'm going to put this back. All right. Break it further. So, I mean, if I run across another copy that doesn't cost too much, because, I mean, as much as I love the character, and even though it's a first appearance, it's probably not until they put him in one of the movies. But Strange Tales 169. I don't have that many key books that I like, and it's especially frustrating because when I first got the Marvel app, I wanted to read the original Brother Voodoo stories, which I don't know that I've read, and if I have, it has been years. And they didn't have them, and I even emailed them, hey, can you put in there, like, I think they finally, 4 years later, put them on the app, so I can read the rest of these, and I can read that panel that got cut out. But other than that, man, oh boy, gosh, this went on a lot longer than I intended it to. I still have to work. Oh well, I guess I'll sleep when I'm dead. All right, that's it for this week. Do some quick. Oh, shut up, Jimmy. 2, 3, 4. Ba da ba 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 ba.